tonight, Dr. Elizabeth Ciceo will speak to us about effective media advocacy, especially how to write an op-ed. She has been there and done that. Please look at her guest essay in the New York Times, published on September 5th, 2023. It reflects the need for clean energy in New Jersey and the irrational anxiety raised by the planned construction of wind farms. Dr. Ciceo obtained her medical degree from the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in New Brunswick and trained in internal medicine during her residency at the University of Pennsylvania Healthcare System. She is board certified in internal medicine. Dr. Ciceo is practicing at Cooper University Healthcare in Camden, where she is the chair of physician engagement and women in medicine. She has an academic appointment as an associate professor of medicine and is director of climate health and director of medical humanities at the Cooper Medical School of Rowan University. Effective editorial writing displays the facts, gathers the arguments, and offers solutions that snap the pieces of the puzzle in place. So please welcome Dr. Ciceo.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. The one change is that I graduated to full professor now, so I had to go back and update all of my talks here. So I really enjoyed doing these, and this really will be interactive, whether you all expected it to be or not. This is a workshop. I do various versions of this, sometimes 60 minutes, sometimes 90 minutes. But I want you, as I go through some of the beginning preface, I want everyone to be thinking about a topic because there is an expectation that you're going to write. And so it does help to have pen and paper. There truly is, I think, something different about the writing process and not just typing. I mean, even for students, there's been shown to be differential uptake of knowledge when you're writing it. It encodes differently in your brain. So as I'm talking, get a pen and paper and be thinking about a topical area that you might want to write on. And if people have no idea what they want to write on, I'll often just say, think about what bothers you. And usually there is no shortage then of topics that start flowing. So what this is not. So there's a lot of different types of communication that you can use for advocacy. Public testimony. This is usually a 3-minute, very, very brief, usually figure it's going to be about 600 words or so, testimony that is going to be on the public record. I'm thinking about EPA and some of the regulations, or talk about rescinding regulations. It's not the Marshall Gantz model of the story of self, us, and now. This is a very particular type of framing in community organizing and in advocacy where you build interest in a topic by sharing your story and then broadening that out to a more universal truth. It's not talking with legislators, although I know this audience is probably very, very well versed in talking with legislators. And it's not being interviewed. Many of you may have the opportunity to be interviewed for either an online piece, a video piece, an article. It's not that either. These are going to be, you may have snippets of information. You may want to highlight one or two things. If you're being interviewed by a podcaster, then you may have the opportunity to speak for half an hour, 40 minutes. So these are all very powerful and useful tools, I would say, in our tool belt, because we really do need to have numerous different ways to engage with the media, because we all know that everyone's attention is being pulled in different directions. So all the more so I'm thankful that you all joined tonight. So Marshall Gantz was a really important community organizer. He was up at Harvard for years, and he was known for working with migrant farmers and really helping to mobilize sources of motivation, helping to construct these shared individual and collective identities. The idea that an individual may not be able to necessarily change and drive a social movement, but by mobilizing an entire community, then you can find the collective courage to move forward with the needed actions. Now, in Marshall Gantz's model, and again, this is what this is not, but just to give you some background in this, if people are interested, I would direct you to look up, what is the story of self, us, and now, because especially if you have a main topical area that is really your area of interest, it helps to spend some time framing this, because you want to have an elevator pitch, essentially, or people that you come in contact with, to be able to say, within 30 seconds, what is your story? Why are you interested in this? Make this compelling. And then, you want to have like a 1-minute version where you're able to spin a tale that really shows how this is important to you and then broadens it to others. Yeah. Now, importantly, some of the reason that we're doing all of this is that, again, with attention issues, we have to break through the inertia. I mean, people are just pulled in so many different directions. There's patient care, I'm on service this week. A lot of things pull at us. And so the way to break through that, it often happens because people are outraged by something. I get the New York Times feed, and so things come through, and there's certainly no shortage of things to get argoed. And what we want to highlight is that there's a contradiction between the world as it is and the world as it should be. And so you want to set up this contradistinction to your audience. And that's really how you try to break through some of that inertia and apathy. But importantly, you can't just lay on all the doom and gloom and not give people a way out. So you want to lay out how things are, but then give people something that they can do. And so when we go through the structure of an op-ed, at the end, I'll talk a little bit about how you should be positioning your article so that it gives someone an action, or at least a mental structure that they can approach a problem that's different, so that they don't slip into that, being overwhelmed and the apathy that can develop when you feel like there's no way out. So why write an op-ed? First of all, it reaches a much wider audience than if you're publishing in medical journals. And I'll very often write perspective pieces as well. So depending on what the topical area is, if it was something like clean energy, I wanted to reach a very broad audience. So for things like that, New York Times, Washington Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, other venues are incredibly important. If it's something New Jersey specific, like for example, a while ago, I wrote about some sustainability issues related to New Jersey hospitals. So I did that in NJ.com, NJ Spotlight. Sometimes it was hyper local, like Courier Post. So there was a different one on offshore wind that was in the press of Atlantic City. So you have to think about where you want, which audience you want to be seeing this. So, but you do want to try to reach a wide audience. And importantly, even if you might not have time as physicians, as students, to read NJ.com, policymakers do. I was often surprised, I would write an op-ed and then I would have congressional aides calling me, and I was like, oh, look at that. They actually read this. I was as surprised as anyone. So it really is important to get your opinion and your voice out there. And the more you do this, the easier it is. Now, it's not an editorial. An op-ed is a very particular type of writing, which is different than a medical perspective piece or an editorial. And it was started in the 1970s in the New York Times. That was not meant to represent the publication's board or its editors. It was written by experts. It was written by someone who had lived experience and really wanted to put forth their unique position on an issue. Now, of course, there's a lot of competition for top media outlets. Incredibly hard to get things published. And with the Times, I had another piece that they were going to publish, but then there wasn't a room in that issue, and things are very timely, so it has to come out like exactly at the right time. And then I had like another piece that they're just like, no, thanks, we're going to pass. So it's really hard to get things published. And medical schools don't generally teach how to write an op-ed or an opinion piece. Even less so is there advice on how you place it. Because after you write this, there's an etiquette to how you go about trying to place a piece. I wanted to just speak very briefly to the lived experience. And I love that they have someone with a white coat on here. Lived experience shouldn't stop you from refraining your voice. And in this piece, they talk about how, how could a white artist have a right to paint Emmett Till, or a white historian do a biography on Frederick Douglass, or Jewish men write about Puerto Rican lives in West Side Story, Tolstoy with Anna Karenina. All these examples that compassion, empathy are imbued in us in our field. And so as physicians, not only do we cultivate this empathy every day with our patients, but we have a wide range of experiences through our patients. And many times our patients are not in a position to elevate issues in a way that we can. We are, as Rudolf Virchow said, the natural attorneys for the poor. And so physicians have a job, have a role to elevate these issues and to use our voice. Now, often in op-eds, there will be a narrative form used. An argumentative structure is also effective. It's just not used as commonly. It's not taught in schools as commonly as the narrative form. So we're going to focus more on the narrative form of dialogue. And you might want to take a screenshot of this because we're going to come back to this. And this is basically how you structure an op-ed. It's the attention. How do you get people's attention? The background, the context, demonstrate through data, through information, through studies, equivocate where you're acknowledging, you're tipping the hat to the people across the aisle or to the counter arguments. But then you come back to what is the issue that you're advocating for and what are the next steps? What's the future direction that you want your audience, your readers to take? So we're going to go into this in more detail. The A for attention. So this is usually either with a narrative lead or a news lead. So a narrative lead is where you're starting with a story. And this was an example from New York Times. So this was at the height of COVID. They talked about a 22-year-old had to make a decision to withdraw life support from his unvaccinated father. So then you want to keep on reading. You want to see what happened in this story. In another example, this is a news flash, a news lead. So they talk about an event on Capitol Hill, what's going on in Congress. So there's a very specific news issue happening, and you can do this with things like, if it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, if there's something going on with vaccines and it's very timely. Now, this does mean that you have to write it quickly, but it's also much more likely to be published because, the news outlets want to produce things that are timely and get read too. They want to grab people's attention. So that's the downside. But if you're willing to kind of work through and do things quickly, you can get a lot of really great things published and out there. So this was another example from the New York Times, another example of an ICU physician who was talking about advanced directives and patient questioning, should they intubate, should they not intubate? So again, you want to keep on reading. So I'm just using the piece that I wrote as an example, not to say that it is a literary masterpiece by any means, but this is, it's relevant to New Jersey. So, but feel free to take other examples, and it helps to read a lot of op-eds to get the flow of them. And very often, really talented op-ed writers will deviate from that ABC structure. And sometimes, they'll kind of like bounce back and forth, and but so take it with a grain of salt. So I just want to start with the first one, and I want people to think about if this is a narrative or a news lead. So this summer, as my children splashed in the freakishly warm ocean waves by the beautiful Victorian seaside town of Cape May, New Jersey, angry protesters gathered a few towns away. And I think people can unmute. But any thoughts as to whether this is news or narrative? Are people able to unmute?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
just going to say everyone is able to unmute.
Okay.
But
Any guesses?
I see Dr. DeJoya, I think, unmuted.
Yeah, that's a narrative. It's not
Great.
something happening that day. It's not something that we're reading about what's happening. It talks about sometime in the summer.
Any other thoughts?
I see there's a comment from Pooja who said a combo of both. You're talking about your personal
Yeah.
experience, but referencing protest.
Yeah. So in this example, it's both. There are protesters basically like right up the street, and my family's on vacation. So it's the story of me on vacation, but it's also this event that's happening around people being upset about offshore wind. Then you go to the background. So this is also called the nut graph. It's basically like encapsulates in a nut within this one paragraph or graph. That little nut should have all the information that people need. So between the attention and the background, those two paragraphs, people should be able to get the thrust of your article. And in all fairness, some people will not read any further, again, because they're busy and tired and other things going on. But this is where you lay out your argument, you raise the stakes, you give more background. So talking about Ørsted, talking about, it's going to be 13 nautical miles off, it's going to power 500,000 homes. So this is some background. And this is what you learned in grammar school, the who, what, when, where, why. And it may end with a quote, may end with a call to action. If you're using a story like that, those patients who were going to be intubated or there was a decision there, then there'll often be a pivot to something like, and they're not unique, or, they are not the only one dealing with this, because then you suddenly broaden it to a larger context. And so then you can open up to say, in fact, millions of unvaccinated Americans are facing XYZ. So that's a very common pivot there if you do decide to use a narrative lead. And then the context. So now you're beginning to give more of a historical perspective, and you have to consider your audience. So if it's for something like the New York Times, your audience is generally educated, but very broad. It could be from any background. Whereas if you're publishing something in a medical journal, you know who's going to read it. You know that there are some things that you can omit because it's going to be, our bread and butter is going to be things that we know all the time. But you might need to give a little bit more information to a general reader. So you start to untangle a long history or a growing trend. So in this example, we were talking about NIMBYism, the not in my backyard phenomenon, and talking about Jersey Shore and $1 million homes. And so this again begins to give a little bit more context to why this is a thing. So if you just start reading, you might be thinking, well, why are people protesting? Like, what's going on at the Jersey Shore that people are protesting? So then you go to demonstrate. This is where you're providing your evidence, and you do this through pathos, logos, and ethos. Now, the pathos is going to be emotions. It's with a story, it might be giving some evidence from a more emotional perspective. Logos is your data, and of course, you want to use a randomized controlled trial or government data as compared to a case report. So as with everything in medicine, you're going to use your best data in this. Ethos comes from you as an expert. And it may be from you as an expert in treating children or in treating patients in an underprivileged environment, or maybe it's because of your upbringing and your background that led you to be an expert in some unique way. So you can think about that evidence in a couple different ways. And you want to lay this evidence out, not just as a list of facts, but again, as a lawyer, and we have some lawyers on the call, try to build a case. And I always tell my medical students and residents this when they're presenting a patient to me. You want to think about building up your assessment and plan as if you're building a case for your diagnosis. So you want to give the most compelling evidence. It's the same thing with this. So in this particular example, then, I was talking about how the fossil fuel industry has been nostalgically evoking simpler times and kind of taking advantage of the anxiety at rapid shifts in our cultural milieu. And so talking about, and these were examples, so this is the evidence. A small business owner wading through corn stalks, or a woman over a gas stove cooking for her family, breathing in all that nitrogen dioxide, gas-powered cars speeding into the wilderness. So like this freedom, this rugged individualism. So this was some of the facts that I used in the demonstrate. And then very importantly, the equivocate section. So this is your to be sure paragraph, where you're acknowledging, to be sure, people will say X, Y, Z, but then you pivot back to your argument, and you're not going to be able to debunk every single argument. You're going to maybe pick out one that might be the most legitimate, provide evidence to say why this is not a valid counter to your position, and then pivot back. And it really is more than just a flourish. It grounds the piece, and it makes you seem more believable. So in this example, I acknowledge that people like me are partly to blame, because we feel this urgency to act, and so we're kind of steamrolling ahead, and we want public health to be advanced quickly, and so we may not necessarily be thinking about the anxiety that people have about an energy transition or switching jobs and economy transitions and things like that, because we're thinking about clean air and public health. And then the future direction. So this is where you have maybe a call to action. Maybe it's saying support a bill in Congress, contact your legislator, boycott this product, buy this product. You're going to be re-summarizing in a very pithy way. And throughout all of this, you want to be using strong nouns, verbs. Well, we'll get into the language in a little bit. But people may only read the first couple paragraphs and the very end. So you want to do a good job throughout, but you really want to do a good job at the end. If you start with a story, you want to tie back into that story at the very end. So that's where you're going to say what happened to that patient that was going to be intubated. So in my example, the fight over Ocean Wind 1 is only one of many high-stake conflicts over clean energy. The risk of losing these battles is nothing less than our very health and that of our children. Instead of shouting across a beach at our neighbors, we should focus on the fossil fuel industry that's trying to kick sand into our eyes. So this was less of a specific, contact your legislator. It was more of building goodwill and trying to expose some of the undercurrent that might be driving some of these trends. For most employed physicians, well, for all employed physicians, anyone in private practice has a little bit more freedom with this, but you always want to talk with your marketing department, make sure that they're aware that you're writing the op-ed that you are, and always put a disclaimer. I'll often do this in my talks as well, that the ideas expressed in this article are solely your own, and and your particular organization might tailor this a little bit or add something more or less. And so just a little bit more now about some details when you're writing. So you want to make sure, and you want to have other people read this as well, especially people who maybe are not a physician or are not familiar with the issue, because they can give you more unbiased opinions about if your article is really as clear as it can be. And you want to make sure that, again, as with reproductive rights, you could go in a lot of different directions. You don't want to try to accomplish too much with one op-ed. You really want to be laser focused on one ask, one issue. If it's get out the vote, then everything should be focused on that. Again, build your case on that. Because you can always write another piece on another position. So make sure you have a clear thesis statement with really good evidence that's backing up that statement and not just an issue necessarily more generally. You can write an outline. I honestly don't do this. I usually just start writing, but many people like writing an outline. It does help to think about what the opposite side will think. So try to think about what would someone on the other side of the aisle say that to maybe poke holes in your argument, because you always want to be considering that. You want to think about how you're writing it. This is not going to be a scholarly publication. We want to have short, simple sentences. You may have an educated audience, but again, they might not be, it might be someone who is, I don't know, a financier and not necessarily in the medical profession. So they might be very intelligent, but not necessarily understand where you're coming from. So you have to make sure that you're clear, powerful, avoid the passive voice. I still fall into this trap all of the time, and I have to correct myself. Short sentences, avoid repetition, make sure that that the flow is good. And this is where an outline can help, but really sentence by sentence, you have to make sure that everything flows and it builds upon each other. And this is often, it sounds easy, but it can be very hard to do, especially because op-eds are often only about 700 words. So you have to be very, very succinct. And then your takeaway. So again, this goes back to the argument. You want to have that one clear thesis. Make sure that your reader walks away with an action, with a clear message, so that they know what to do. They know what you're saying. When you're pitching your op-ed, often there's just a portal on the journal's website. You may know a particular person. Sometimes there'll be a list of the editorial staff, and you can send it to the person who may best fit with that interest area. You want to really craft a nice email introduction or paragraph for your pitch. You want to explain why you are the best person to write that. What is your expertise? Importantly, we send everything as attachments. Don't send it as an attachment. Editors are not going to open it up because they get a ton of attachments, and they don't want to open up something that's going to poison their computer. So you send it in the body of the email. You just cut and paste it at the end of the email. When you're putting in pieces, it might be a reference to a scholarly article, to another website. You're going to put it as a link, and you're not going to have a reference section. Again, this is not a scholarly work. And again, you're going to tailor it to the audience. So it's different. Like when I've written pieces for ROI New Jersey, that's a slightly different pitch than if it's to a local news outlet or to Star Ledger. You may be asked to do revisions. When I had to do revisions for the New York Times, I think I went through like 3 or 4 different revisions. So, it's just like, again, a scholarly article. Don't get defensive. The editors are very talented. They are there to help you, and they will make your piece better in the process. So always welcome it. And I'm going to close there and just open it up for any questions or other comments that people might have.
Yeah, Dr. Chichea, thank you so much for this presentation. It's really fascinating. And even as someone who's done a fair amount of writing, these are phenomenal ideas. I looked up what was it? Ethos,
Yes.
pathos,
And logos, yeah.
Apparently that's Aristotle. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I guess maybe that's a good way for me to start my question, because it's from the extremely historical to the extremely modern. What are your thoughts on the influence of ChatGPT and large language models
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
drafting
Mhm.
these types of pieces of writing?
Yeah, so I think to really have an authentic piece, it has to be your voice. That being said, if you have no idea where to start, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to put into Chat GPT and say, like, write me an op-ed on blah blah blah. But then just be willing to scrap the entire thing. Like, Chat GPT has a very distinctive sound. um, and it doesn't sound like me or like you or like other people on the call. And I think now more than ever, people want that authenticity, and they want to be able to connect to a person on the other side of the op-ed and understand the tangible, like the person who was riding the bike. ChatGPT couldn't come up with something like that. It can pull facts and things like, but it's not going to have that compelling storyline. And so, start with it, but then scrap everything and use it as a scaffold to build your voice onto.
It's great advice. Thank you. I see Dr. Henry Dindial has her hand up.
Hi. Thanks. I joined late, so I missed the beginning part, but this was excellent. What if so you sometimes I'll see an article, and then I'll see the op-ed, and I totally disagree with the op-ed. So is there advice for, like, if you want to make a response to that op-ed, should we be doing the same approach, or is that something you just kind of write in like this? Does that get,
Yeah. Yeah. So letters to the editor are even shorter usually. I mean, you could potentially try to pre-position, and I would ask the editor for guidance on something like this. Say, is there interest in a piece showing mirror image of this article, and they may want to publish something that is that mirror image, and set that up. Again, I would be willing to, you'd have to be willing to do it quickly, because memory is short. And so if you do put that out there, just, know that you might have to block off 4 hours, 5 hours, and, bang this thing out quickly.
Okay.
A letter to the editor is shorter. So usually, 400 words or so. Which, it seems easy because it's shorter. A lot of times shorter is
harder?
I forget who said the quote. I can't even get the quote right now, but that a novel was like 400 pages because they didn't have the time to make it shorter. So it's a hard thing to do, but yeah, I think if you can get it out in a timely fashion, then that's very powerful. Even if it comes out later, I would still try for it, because, again, you are an expert, and so you want to put yourself forward as such. And again, make that really strong pitch to the editor. Like, why are people going to click on it or open up this article?
Okay, great, thanks.
Well, or just to say, oh, you saw one, then you did one, and now you taught us.
Yes.
I thank you
Thank you
for a
so
great
much, Dr.
presentation.
Blumenthal. Thank you for the opportunity. And, if folks on this call want to send me rough drafts, I am happy to add a few comments to it. So, feel free to reach out to me as well.
And will there be the notes from the beginning? Because I know I missed the very beginning.
I can send that to you.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you, Dr.
I think it is going to be recorded as well.
Yes, this was recorded, and we'll be posting on our website, and we will edit out any personally shared writing. Thank you also, Dr. Trujillo, for the offer to assist the medical students. I think a number of them are really interested in writing op-eds.
Wonderful.
Here.
Love it.
So you may get some emails incoming.
Love it.
All right. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank-
Have a good evening.